Hello, everyone. This is JT Keating, the SVP of Marketing for Zimperium. I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar today. We're really excited. We're having this webinar in conjunction with our good friends at Microsoft. So before we dive in, the usual perfunctory conversation, we will make sure that the archive and slides are available at the end of the session, and they'll be up probably within a few hours. Please use the Q&A section for the capabilities. We try not to use the chat stuff much because it doesn't work out very well sometimes on these webinars. So if you have any questions, even if it's technical, please just send it into the Q&A part, and we're going to try and keep it to roughly 30 minutes, if even that, of content. And then Q&A at the end. If there aren't any questions, we don't make it up. We don't kind of believe in that whole side of things. We'll just give you a little bit of time back. So this webinar we're super excited about. Zimperium is still the only solution, mobile solution providing threat forensics into the next generation SIEM, Microsoft Sentinel. And so what we're going to basically do here is we're going to run you through a little bit, help you understand Sentinel itself, a little bit about Zimperium and the types of threats we're detecting, and then we're actually going to show you how it all kind of comes together. So first, I'd like to introduce our speakers. The first one is Dave Branscombe. Dave is a senior cloud security architect for Microsoft. So Dave, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. It's going to be a nice presentation.
It's going to be fun. We're definitely looking forward to it. And then we're also joined by the gent that runs all pre-sales in the Americas for Zimperium, Kern Smith. So Kern, great to have you as well, my friend.
Thanks for having me, JT, and Dave. Looking forward to the conversation as well. Should be a good one.
So let's dive in. And as I mentioned, this whole concept is about putting mobile threat data in. And right now, roughly 60% of the endpoints accessing the enterprise are mobile. So when you start thinking about endpoint security, that's an endpoint that needs to be accounted for. But one of the things that at Zimperium we're very big believers in is the concept of trying to find a centralized place to not only view data across all endpoints and networks and everything, but also to start orchestrating some responses back out of it. And we're very big fans of Sentinel. But Dave, would you mind just kind of spending a few minutes talking about what Sentinel is all about, so that we can then have the context upon which to put the mobile data into it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, JT. So I think it goes without saying that the job or the mission, you might say, of your SecOps teams in an organization is becoming more and more difficult as the years progress. We've got different attack techniques. The frequency of attacks is increasing dramatically. They evolve very quickly. And this puts a lot of pressure on your security teams within the organization, because there are also changes in the way that defensive technologies are approaching the problem. There's an acceleration in the adoption of cloud and hybrid technologies. And just recently, of course, we all know that we've suddenly introduced this idea of borderless zero trust networking to nearly every organization on the planet. So that creates a perfect storm of challenges for SecOps teams. And you add to that the fact that there is a growing shortage of SecOps analysts and specialists that's supposed to reach somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3.5 million by next year. That's what CISO magazine reported just recently. And so that you combine that with the challenge that we face in terms of the complexity and volume of alerts. So attacks are increasingly becoming what we call heterogeneous, right? So a typical attack typically is going to span a number of different aspects of your environment. So it may start off on a mobile device, which is what we're going to be focusing on today, But then from that mobile device, it may transition over to a laptop or a desktop. And then from there to a cloud service or a database. It may span multiple identities. Different users are being attacked. Different tenants for Office 365 or Azure, or whatever it might be. All these things combine to create a very challenging alert and signal environment for SOC analysts to understand. And so they face this alert fatigue. They're getting so many alerts from disparate systems, and there's no real way to stitch them all together. So that creates a real challenge. When you add to this the fact that many of the legacy SIEMs that we see in organizations are very expensive to implement and maintain, and they tend to be very good at aggregating signals, maybe less good at making sense of those signals and putting them together into a cohesive, maybe like an attack chain, so that people understand what's actually taking place and can respond to those attacks. There's a lot of challenges that IT organizations are facing. If you'd like to go to the next slide, please. And so moving to the cloud can help manage the complexity of this expanding digital estate and the expansion of this alerting within your environment. And so moving things to the cloud can help simplify things and make security easier to manage. Security is always going to be complex and a challenge in many aspects, but it can help it to become easier. And what's great is that the artificial intelligence and the automation that come along with a service in the Azure cloud, the way I think about it is it becomes a force multiplier for security teams. You aren't, in effect, adding one more SOC analyst to your team, you're adding dozens. And those dozens of SOC analysts are able to work at speeds that are actually unattainable for humans, right? So this AI and automation does what dozens of humans could do in a fraction of the time. So it allows you to leverage those large-scale intelligence capabilities in the cloud and make them work for your organization. And the third slide, please. This is why we at Microsoft reimagined the SIEM and SOAR tool sets and created a single tool called Azure Sentinel. So Azure Sentinel makes it easier to collect this security data across your environment, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud, in different clouds, non-Microsoft clouds, whether you're managing mobile devices, laptops, desktop servers, third-party clouds combined with user data and application data. Then it then takes all that signal together, all those alerts, and uses that artificial intelligence I was talking about to ensure that you're able to identify threats very quickly, and that you aren't just spending a lot of your time investigating how to upgrade your SIEM or how to add more storage to your SIEM because you're running out of storage. So offloading the infrastructure piece of the SIEM and adding in a capability that on-prem SIEMs don't have, that of artificial intelligence and in many cases automation. And so since Sentinel is built on Azure, it does benefit from this concept of limitless speed, limitless scale, and it can scale automatically to address capacity needs. That typically tends to be one of the areas where we see SIEMs maybe falling behind a little bit, is that you kind of have to pre-build a whole lot of infrastructure for your SIEM. You have to build out a lot of storage, build out servers, and until you actually get into the process of investigating an alert, much of that compute and storage capacity is relatively idle. So you're overbuilding your SIEM on-prem. That's not the case with Azure. You can build out the capacity as you need it and leverage the capacity when you're doing an investigation that requires maybe higher compute resources and so on. So that's kind of the big story behind Azure Sentinel. One of the great things about Azure Sentinel right now is we're allowing customers to import their Office 365 data directly into Azure Sentinel for free. So you can start getting the alerting out of Office 365 in Azure Sentinel without any ingestion costs. So that's a nice thing to think about. But I know that the reason that most of you have attended is to find out how Zimperium can complement the capabilities of Azure Sentinel. So let's turn it over to Kern and kind of get the picture from Zimperium's point of view. So Kern.
Yeah, perfect, Dave. Actually, I'm going to take the next couple slides real quick. But before I do, I have a question for you. First of all, as I said, big fans of the whole approach of this next generation SIEM. I mean, if you think about all the attacks and how sinuous they are, they can weave their way around different paths, and it takes forever for a human being to be able to respond to it. So throwing artificial intelligence at it and then figuring out the orchestration parts, as we're going to talk about, are really big. I've heard Gartner is using a term, is starting to coin a term called XDR, right? Kind of like taking EDR and taking, and elevating it to the next step. And when they describe XDR, it sounds an awful lot like what Sentinel is. Are you familiar with the XDR term? And do you think it applies here as well? I mean, I know that's always one of these interesting things of when you're transitioning something, you want to use something similar like a SIEM term, but then a SIEM oftentimes is connoted with visibility, not necessarily action. So are you familiar with the XDR term, and kind of what are your thoughts about it if you are?
So you caught me flat-footed there, and I know that we do use the term XDR, and specifically with regard to like Defender. I don't remember off the top of my head what the X stands for, but what I would say is the capabilities that are built into like the Microsoft Defender stack, which if you saw Ignite, Defender has kind of become a larger brand than just the endpoint detection piece. It's covering identity, it's covering Azure and so on. So it's become a much broader tool set. But it does have that EDR, and I do remember they did mention this XDR capability. I don't have the recollection of exactly what that's doing. I apologize.
Okay.
But
No problem. And I apologize for throwing it to you. It was more of just a question as I'm starting to get into it, because these terms come up all the time. And so I'm not 100% sure. So I guess I probably could have warned you on that, but I didn't think about it until just now. So, but let's pivot over, as Dave was talking about, to the mobile side of things. And so we're here to talk about the mobile devices. And the first thing to kind of understand is, as I mentioned at the onset, 60% of the devices accessing an enterprise are mobile today. And they have access to the same assets and access to networks and stuff as traditional endpoints do. There's 4 primary attack vectors, and Kern's going to be showing some of this here in a minute, that you have to think about on mobile devices. That some of them are very familiar to you, like malicious apps, phishing is becoming huge, full-on device compromises. One of the interesting things is that network attacks really have to be accounted for on mobile. If you think about even before the pandemic, the vast majority of the time that somebody was on a mobile device connecting to networks, it was outside of our protected corporate networks, because of course they're mobile by definition. So something that we've handled in the traditional corporate space by having network security products, all of a sudden it's a very real attack vector on mobile. So those are the 4 primary attacks on mobile. There have been solutions previously across device network phishing and apps, DNAP, that have been predominantly around encryption and containers, things What it lacked was any kind of proactive threat detection. And so when you think about what Dave was talking about in terms of the data that can flow into Sentinel, for instance, you need that same kind of threat detection capability as you would do currently on traditional endpoints. So that's what mobile threat defense is. That's what Zimperium is the enterprise leader in, is mobile threat defense. For those folks that really like to understand context, here's how Gartner describes MTD, which is basically the mobile equivalent of EPP and EDR. So if you want a construct, kind of like we were talking about with Dave's conversation about SIEMs or SOARs, right? EPP and EDR to traditional endpoints equals mobile device on mobile endpoints. And then Dave mentioned, this is one of the things we're really excited about, is when you actually have AI machine learning capabilities that can come together because you need that force multiplier, as he was talking about. In Sentinel, the AI machine learning capability is in correlating all of these random threats, et cetera, and creating some rhyme and reason and action out of them. Zimperium uses machine learning on device in a different capacity. So Kern, can you step us through a couple of comments about our solution, and then we'll talk about how they all tie together.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of tag on with the challenges that Dave rightfully and clearly kind of enunciated for security teams, the challenge is that security in general has to a certain extent become inherently reactive, right? New threats are emerging every day. Staying on top of emerging threats across all the endpoints that are kind of propagating throughout the enterprise, it has become a significant challenge. And then kind of wrangling all that into meaningful data sets so that organizations can actually understand what the impact of these items are potentially, not just from a pure technical perspective, but what's the business impact, right? What does this actually mean to the company as a whole? So for us, when we look at how can we do detections on a mobile device, there's kind of a few key priorities that we know that we have to accomplish for anything, especially mobile. First off, we need to account for the evolving nature of mobile threats, right? So having the ability to detect 0 days is incredibly important, and being able to do that without having to update or constantly query backends for those updates is very important, especially for mobile, because they're not always connected, right? Or they may have lag in that. So on-device detection and the ability to do 0 days is incredibly important. The on-device component is very important as well, because devices aren't always connected, but you also have the privacy aspect that comes into play. So the ability to do 0-day detection or detection for both known and unknown threats across all of the key mobile threat vectors, device level, risk and exploits, network attacks, malicious apps, and increasingly phishing. And when we think about it, and when COVID hit, phishing attacks climbed over 600%. And a lot of those focused on both the managed, but more importantly, the unmanaged aspects of mobile devices. It's important to be able to get that visibility and those protections. So that's where Zimperium's Z9 detection engine comes into play. It sits on device, it's been trained in the lab using machine learning, and it's able to detect on device for both known and unknown threats against all those device network application phishing layer threats. I could probably go on for days on this, but I'll just kind of move on to the next slide if that's okay, JT. So the way that we're talking about how to get the Z9 engine onto the device, and really this is about enabling enterprise-enabled devices either through MDM management, MAM management, it doesn't really matter, is what we call our ZIPS application. And really it's part of our overall enterprise device protection package. It integrates with all the major EMM platforms, especially we have some very unique integrations with Microsoft EMS, formerly known as Intune, on both the MDM and the MAM side. But the idea is to identify risk, be able to do detections and remediations both on device, and then leverage server-side reportings to augment those detections and allow organizations to leverage the detailed forensics we can get about the system behavior, so that they can then integrate with solutions like Sentinel to get a fuller and clearer picture on what's going on within the organization as a whole, not just specifically on mobile or in silos on other endpoints. So that's really what we talk about when we talk about enabling the enterprise. How do we detect on device, but then leverage those detections and the granular forensics with Sentinel so that organizations really can maximize the value of all solutions and create a more cohesive security structure for the entire organization. So, JT, if you don't mind. So, from an integration standpoint, we have some very unique integrations with Microsoft across the entire stack. Right now, we're talking about Sentinel, and it's a very unique integration. There's really a lot of, you're leveraging the best of both worlds with the analytic capabilities and the ability for Sentinel to ingest and kind of automate using AI and those type of things, a lot of the investigative tools. But we also have integrations across both, deploying what we call our Z console on the Azure cloud platform, and then integrations with EMS/Intune on both the MAM and VM side, and also Defender ATP. And what it allows organizations to do, especially as folks are trying to consolidate these approaches, it really gives them a single, similar to a single pane of glass using Sentinel for a lot of these things, while still being able to leverage existing investments, and standardization, say, on the Azure platform and other tools within it. And then being able to work and we've done mutual work, development work with the Microsoft product management team across all these areas to ensure that the integrations are seamless, and that, again, the value that can be leveraged based off of our differentiated detection capabilities and forensics capabilities feeds into all the other differentiated and highly valuable features and tools that Microsoft makes available in the larger Azure platform, specifically with Sentinel. So, JT. So we'll get into what this looks like, within the demo, but really it starts off with, again, the tool, and David, I'm sure you would agree with this. Any analytics tool or SIEM tool, and especially AI in general, is only good as the data that it's going to gain. So what we focus in on is providing granular forensics and granular detections across that full stack of threats, both early on in the kill chain cycle and then ultimately leading up to, hopefully not for your organization, but a full compromise, so that organizations can leverage Sentinel to identify those initial exposure points, stop the attack in its tracks, and prevent it from spreading across the rest of the organization. And that comes through the integrations that we have both out of the box, and also the capabilities for Sentinel to manage those events, to identify early on in that kill chain, not just on the device, but within the organization, to prevent those lateral movements and map it up to, say, the MITRE ATT&CK framework, those types of things that, again, become a force multiplier for many organizations so that they extract the most amount of value across the board and ultimately help secure their organization in a manner that is more transparent to the users, less workload across the board, and maximizes value across all of these investments.
That's perfect. Thank you, Kern. And now I'm going to stop sharing.
Yep.
And that way Kern can start sharing.
Yeah.
And we'll show you some of this stuff in actual action.
I guess that's my cue then. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, great. So what I'm showing is just the initial setup that we have with Microsoft Sentinel. And as you can see here in the Zimperium Z console, we have different threat reporting aspects, and the setup with Sentinel couldn't be easier. It's literally a click through. You would obtain the workspace ID and the primary key from the Sentinel platform, copy and paste, and then you literally define what are the threat event levels that I want to define in, and what's the level of detail that I want to go off on. From there, at that point, Sentinel now has a lot of power to, and again, I'm not an expert in Sentinel, so I'm going to beg for forgiveness from David and the Microsoft team and a lot of SCs, as they're probably going, this is so basic, why is he showing this? But the idea is that we want to start with getting visibility into these threats. And what I've done is started off with saying, okay, look, I know what I'm looking for. So if I want to start with analytics, I actually want to maybe start using some of the rules and things of that nature to get an idea of, okay, what are the things that are important to me? Be it high level critical events like a full mobile compromise, maybe events that are taking place on the corporate network, but also, hey, what are certain things that may indicate risk posture, right? A potential credential compromise with a phishing attack, or something along the lines of a network event. So now when I'm immediately looking at the overview, I actually get a pretty good idea. Wow, I've got some chained events taking place here that are pretty interesting, and I probably need to do some investigation on. So if I go into the mobile compromise aspect of things, well, and I start looking at the investigations on it, I actually can see some of the different areas that this would bring up concern. So there's a lot of related alerts for this user specifically that kind of open up based off those incidents, but also for the device when it was connected to the IP and the host itself. So all of a sudden, from an investigative standpoint, I'm pretty concerned here, right? This is something that makes me, that I would need to investigate. And rightfully so, because here's what ultimately is happening. In what I've done is I staged an event where I have a device connected to a network. In this example, we're kind of mimicking a corporate network, but this could be any network. In this case, the device is not compromised in any way, shape, or form. But as an attacker, what I'm going to do is actually start leveraging, and this demo, by the way, is just to show the depth and breadth of detections. Any of these attacks can take place in any shape or form. But in this case, the attacker is going to stand up a network-related event targeting the attack, so basically targeting the device, so basically a man in the middle. So once the attacker starts that attack, they're actually going to build a piece of malware on the fly that's going to be hosted on the server and start this attack. Immediately, Zips is going to pick up on the network event, but also because this attack is doing a redirect to a phishing site, we also pick up on the phishing event. So multiple layers of detection across the board. And as we all know, phishing is a great example of this. This could be over SMS, it could be personal email, it could be any number of things. I'm just trying to get the person to a website, right, that I own and control. So at this point, the attacker now owns the connectivity of the device. Anytime the user goes to visit a website, maybe to see what the news of the day is, they're going to automatically be redirected to that phishing site. Again, Zips is picking up that that is a risky site. Do you want to proceed further or not? By the way, we can block this out of the box. This is just a matter of policy. But at this point, I've now triggered multiple events, multiple things. I'm already setting alarms off on the Sentinel side saying, hey, there's some things going on here. But at this point, the user's now been manipulated to download a piece of malware onto the device. Zips has already picked up on that. And when they actually install that piece of malware, in this case, the main activity payload, I'll just kind of fast forward on this. Once it's installed, you'll see Zimperium picks up that, hey, you now have a malicious app on the device. So again, that whole device network application phishing, I've already triggered application, network, and phishing at this point. So as an attacker, I now have command and control within that sandbox, the malware sandbox, so I can do different things within that user space. In this case, it's user space A120. So at this point, as an attacker, I'm going to leverage the permissions of that app to maybe do a little recon. Let's take a picture, see what's going around. So now I take a picture remotely, and you can see the corner of my eyeglasses. I definitely need to clean my glasses for sure. But at this point, the attacker is now going to try to upload and gain persistence on the device. So they're going to upload an exploit package to the device itself, run it, and ultimately do a persistent compromise on the device. So at this point, the attacker runs that exploit, and we see what happens. On device, the attackers gain persistent root, but on device, Zips has detected those persistent OS modifications, and ultimately the device is now compromised with system tampering. So full-fledged detections across the entire kill chain. That's great, one would say. But what does this mean for the investigation? Well, from an investigation standpoint, now when I look at Sentinel, I now have all of those events captured. I now have the capability to investigate these items with much more granular detail. If I want to go in and say, do a little bit of hunting on these items and say, let's look at the analytics. I now know I need to look at some of these mobile compromises. So if I go ahead and say, look at these events, look at these analytics, maybe look at the hunting capabilities I have with the mobile compromises, if I look at the results of this query, I now have a very good sense of what's taking place here. In this case, this host has quite a few mobile malware events that are critical in nature and taking place. Now, I can leverage Sentinel's AI to give me further information about these items. I can actually go in and leverage these queries and get even more information. Say, for example, if I use this, and Dave, again, I apologize, I'm definitely not showing the full capabilities of Sentinel here. I'm kind of doing this a little manually. But if I go in, I can actually get more information based off of that visibility and say, device ID equals there. now I can see the full kill chain of those attacks, gain some more information about the actual event, and we see this kill chain leading up to, in this case, the suspicious, the network interception, which also created this phishing link that led to the app delivery, that led to a sideload app being installed, which was a suspicious app. I now see the details around what took place that led to a full system tampering event. I actually see in this case that the file system was remounted read-write. And now when I go into those instances, and as I bring more data in from other areas in my organization, I can now gain more visibility into those instances, into those threats. And actually, as I do the investigations and bring in other data points, I can see, okay, how could this have migrated from, say, in this case, just this mobile compromise, but is the user now potentially exposed? Is there something going on with the gateway that the device was connected to? Is this host being exposed to other items? And now I can create those linkages to make sure that if a device is compromised, the threat is isolated only to the device, automated remediation takes place, and Sentinel is going to help me quarantine that exposure both early in the kill chain, but also prevent that lateral movement to other exposed endpoints or other accounts that that user may have access to. So, yeah.
Can I inject something here? Yeah,
please,
so
please.
As you were talking through this, it did trigger something in my head finally about what XDR is, right? So when we talk about EDR, you're talking about endpoint detection and response. So what's happening on that mobile device. But XDR is actually talking about extended detection and response, and that's what we're looking at here. So it's talking about, you know, where did the threat go from the mobile device? You know, you've got a risk to the user, you've got a risk to the gateway, I believe is what you described it.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, across the kill chain, what are the other pieces of that attack? That's the XDR piece. So I just want to kind of inject that in there to make sure that the question was answered.
Oh yeah, you know, again, I apologize for catching you cold on that, Dave, but that's exactly right. I mean, for me, it's like the SIEM concept again is a visibility thing predominantly, right? And we don't need more alerts. We need more intelligence. We need more ability to act. We need more automation. So it's this world converging. And what I think is really interesting is you can see through the conversation that Kern was just going through why we have so many joint customers with Microsoft. First, we've got that great tie-in, whether it's on the MDM or the MAM side of things, largely for managed devices and BYOD. So we've got those connections. So if we detect something like Kern was just doing, we can automatically take action, whether it's conditional access or conditional launch, right then and there, having to do with the device itself. But then there's these other pieces, like Kern was saying, okay, how can I use this data? Am I now worried about Dave, and this is Dave's device, and what else do I need to think about with Dave? If Dave's device is being used in two-factor authentication, that's a potential thing that we would do via Sentinel to say, hey, let's go do something about this, right? If Dave's laptop on the same compromised network? So I think it becomes very interesting when you actually take the data from one domain and, to your point, Dave, extend it into responses potentially in other areas. What do you guys think about that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree. I mean, we obviously kind of took a very mobile-centric view on this for this demo, but to Dave's point, you know, a device, an endpoint has multiple attributes on it that organizations are worrying about securing, be it the user identity, be it the connectivity, be it the actual host itself, and being able to use Sentinel to identify where those potential weaknesses or vulnerabilities are in place, so that, you know, using other tools that feed into the other endpoints that say this user may be leveraging, right? You can easily start getting a good sense of, okay, was it the user that was compromised? Was it the host itself that was compromised? Where was the initial where was the initial point of ingress at this point? Because that's where I need to actually make some investments later on to patch up those weaknesses and those holes, right? And that's one value. That's another point of value that through Sentinel and the integration, you can start actually really readily identifying where certain weaknesses are within the security structure, but more importantly, help prevent the spread of this exploit from going from this user to other devices that the user leverages, or other accounts generally, or endpoints generally within the organization structure.
We didn't even talk about the ability of an organization to take, for example, this attack, and if we know how to remediate it, we can create an automation process so that the next time something like that is identified, it's remediated automatically without having to introduce, manual processes into the.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, Dave, you hit it right on there. That automation portion of it just becomes that force multiplier. For the sake of demo, we kind of slowed things down and made it very manual, but through the tooling that that Sentinel has, and I think with the fidelity of data that Zimperium can provide, along with other solutions on non-mobile endpoints, you hit the nail on the head. This just becomes a tool that can learn from itself and actually create those type of playbooks and automations that really create value for organizations as a whole.
Exactly. Well, thank you guys. We're a little bit past where we said we were going to go. We are going to turn to questions and answers here for a second. And we do have one coming in. While we look for some others, I did want to just recommend one thing for folks. Kern was talking about the power of machine learning for zero-day detection. We actually, our Z-Lab researchers are the best on the planet. Those guys are wicked smart when it comes to mobile threats. That was for my guys in Boston, talking about it being wicked awesome. But we put up a post at the beginning of the week on Joker, 64 variants of the Joker malware that's floating around the internet, and the ability to be able to detect these variations in real time is what Kern was talking about. So that post is up. It's also all over the internet, and there's various different places you guys can check that out. So Kern, the first question that we have, and currently the only question, so this might be a quick Q&A, is if you detect a threat, you can capture this in a log, and you also react to the threat and what that response might be. So it really comes down to the remediation reaction pieces that we were discussing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I mean, for purposes of demo, we really just showed, detection and local alerting only. As far as remediation goes, it's a multi-tiered approach, and really just depends on what policies are appropriate for the customer and the type of threat that we're talking about. But generally, it starts with what are we doing on device from a remediation standpoint to either interrupt or remediate the threat directly based on the OS platform and different tooling that may or may not be available at that point. And then you start getting into server-side remediations, say with EMS, to either revoke access or do conditional launch, conditional access, those type of things. So kind of server-side initiated items. And that's specific for mobile. And then when you get with the Sentinel integration, you're really talking about remediation from a larger organizational standpoint. So, the playbooks that you're implementing, the automations on that side, basically how do I isolate and prevent the spread of a compromise where a device to reach that compromise point to mitigate, to basically staunch the bleeding and mitigate that exposure, right? Or identify potential areas of vulnerabilities or weaknesses that I may need to invest in to shore up as an ongoing activity, just from a defensive security measure standpoint. So it's definitely multi-tiered. Much of it's going to depend on kind of the customer and the posture on it. It's kind of the 80-20 rule. 80% of it's going to be common. The other 20% is going to be unique, if you will. But it starts with, on-device, server side, organizational side, et cetera, and kind of expands from there.
Perfect. And because all these pieces are kind of linked together with this XDR capability, what we've got is you can take action on the mobile device, but using Azure Sentinel and some of the automation processes there, you can say, I'm going to force the user to change their password. I'm going to force them to do multi-factor authentication. I'm going to say that the the laptop that user is using that was compromised. I'm going to isolate that from the network so that it can't compromise other areas of the network if there's malware on the laptop. So there's, I mean, the opportunities for automating and quickly responding to things is really just up to how much time you want to invest in creating those automation processes and run books.
Yeah, and like you said, Dave, it's a force multiplier, right? It's very much one of those things where spending 10 minutes today will probably save you hours, if not days later, for the key plays, as you were talking about. And we've seen it happen so many times. I mean, the principle of land and expand is alive and well in the security world, right? It's very rarely is any given endpoint the end point, right? I mean, it's an entry vehicle that then goes sideways, and the ability to detect, stop, and remediate that spread as quickly as possible is where the power of something like Sentinel really comes in. But to Kern's point, depending on the better information and better data and the more real-time data that you get from those endpoints, providing the information in is key to start the whole process. So with that, we are out of questions and out of time. Dave, Kern, thank you guys very much. As always, it's been a blast. So thank you guys for participating. And with that, I will let everybody else go and enjoy the rest of their day. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.